There's actually so much that's happening right now. It's a highly dynamic political situation that we're in. We've actually just received news that the president has left the country and is in a nearby country. There is, as you mentioned, an ongoing debate about arson committed at the Prime Minister's house and who is actually responsible. The Prime Minister has made a very emotional statement on the event about his house being burned down. And there has not been an impartial, conclusive investigation yet. So that is still, it's still being discussed, and there's a debate going on there. And I think of note also is that the main opposition party has said that it's ready to appoint a new president and prime minister, and have put forward what seems like an economic recovery plan to parliament.
But the leaders haven't stepped down yet. Protesters say they'll stay at the president's residence until he is gone. We've seen some stunning footage come out of there. What's the situation there like now?
Yeah, I think protesters are actually occupying these spaces, and they say they will stay there until they receive official notification that the president is stepping down. All Sri Lankans, I think, across the country are waiting to hear whether these resignations will come through. The president has informed both the speaker and the prime minister of his intentions to resign on Wednesday, July 13th. And the prime minister, on his part, has said he would resign after the formation of an all-party government. So we're all just waiting now for an official, for official written resignations.
How have the protests been portrayed in Sri Lanka?
Well, it's interesting that you asked that, because there's a very distinct difference between how the protests are portrayed in Sri Lanka and how they have been sometimes portrayed by international media. So sometimes the international media can characterize the protesters as sort of this homogenous, angry, violent mob, a bunch of hungry South Asian people storming a building in anger, in desperation, setting fire to buildings. But locally, the protesters are viewed with a great deal of sympathy, compassion, and I think pride. There have been so many moments of creativity, music, art, and humor. And there is sympathy that the individuals who are protesting, who have been protesting now peacefully for months, are really just victims of economic mismanagement. And they have a right to protest, of course, but they have been met consistently with assault, with arrest, with various forms of state repression that should not be condoned, given that the state has duties that citizens do not.
What is the police presence like, and could they indeed move in on the protesters and force them out of the presidential palace?
It's unclear what the police might do in the future, but for now it seems that the police and the military are not really, they're not standing up to the protesters, they're not evicting them, and I think that has been the status quo for today, at least. And they seem to be taking a bit of a back step, allowing protesters to move around these state buildings.
Why is the president even waiting until later this week to resign? Does it not send the message to the people that he's still trying to cling to power?
Well, I think that's what a lot of observers and analysts are very suspicious of. There have been several delay tactics that this government has used in the past. These calls for resignation of the president and the prime minister have been very much part of protests for a long time, for months now. I think protesters have been asking the president to step down. So the fear is that this is just a time-buying tactic or exercise. But we can't really say for sure right now. The president is in another country, and he needs to sign the official resignation letter and have that delivered. He says he will do that on Wednesday, so that's in 2 days.
Well, presuming he does do that, what happens next? Who governs the country and takes on the mammoth task of dragging it out of the economic crisis Sri Lanka is in?
That's a good question. I mean, the economy is still in dire straits. The headline inflation for the country is 50%. Food inflation is about 60%, and these conditions are going to get worse. Many families are still skipping meals, and fuel levels are very low. So the economy is effectively at a standstill, and it's a big task to take the country out of this kind of situation. We're at a very critical historical juncture in the country right now. There's a leadership vacuum, and we see many presidential hopefuls emerging at this point, giving press conferences, putting themselves forward. And the transition away from the Rajapaksas was, of course, certainly good for the country, as they've represented, corrupt, ethno-nationalist, crony capitalist, rent-seeking elite. But the type of leadership we transition to is also just as important, because that will really pave the path for future reforms. And it's a very critical and important moment in the history of this country.
Indeed. And the Prime Minister says he'll only leave office when a multi-party government is in place. When might that be?
Well, we're all hoping that it'll be very soon, because, as I mentioned, the economic situation is not getting is not going to get better on its own. I know that the IMF has put out a statement saying that technical discussions are ongoing with the finance ministry and central bank officials, but to get any reforms passed, we do need a government that is able to pass reforms. And so I think an all-party government would be a positive move, because we do really need confidence in government, and perhaps that is one of the best shots we do have at having a stable political system. But it has to happen relatively soon, given that people are going to remain hungry and the economy is not going to recover on its own.
Meanwhile, Australia has offered Sri Lanka $50 million in aid. Does more need to be done among the international community to help Sri Lanka?
Anything that can be done at this stage, I feel, would be warmly welcomed by the people of Sri Lanka. I believe there are so many communities who are at risk and who are going under the radar. Children are one such community. They're suffering from malnutrition now, and those rates are set to double, actually. So any aid, I think, from the diplomatic community, from Australia, would really be welcome, I think, for Sri Lankans at this juncture.
Amita Arudpragasam, thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you for having me.